You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This episode, we are speaking with Connor and Lynn of Random Goth Couple. We'll be chatting about whether or not goths and goth music are too stuck in the 80s, the ways in which goth is portrayed in popular culture, learn about the goth scene in Ireland, and a lot more. We also have All Goth Considered from Obscura Undead's Azzy Bats. They have interviews with Cemetery Siren and Allie Frost. And then I'll close out the episode with some contemplation on the commoditization of goth and the future of the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host, Trey. So let's start with introductions. If you two don't mind, can you tell us about what your journey into goth was? Sort of what's your origin story?
So you want to answer this first, or will I answer this
You
first?
can go ahead. Always, you can go first.
Yeah,
Take
okay.
the lead.
For me personally, it is a real mixed bag as to how I got here. So growing up, I had 3 siblings, and they're all there's quite a varied age gap between us all. So my eldest siblings were like legitimate 80s cure heads growing up. So they were teenagers in the 80s. They had the like teased, backcombed black hair, the whole shebang. So growing up around them, I was like introduced to a lot of their music and stuff. So even like as a really young child, they would have all their like vinyls and then tapes and CDs of bands like The Cure and The Cult and things like that. And then my other sibling was a teenager in the 90s, and I shared a bedroom with him growing up. And he was very into he was into a lot of different stuff, but he had like a definite phase where he was really into kind of like the Smashing Pumpkins and the Nine Inch Nails and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he had this like giant Cradle of Filth poster that he put up in our bedroom, and it was like this really graphic picture of maybe I won't go into too much detail, but for like a 9-year-old child, I was like, whoa, this is wild.
Yeah.
These guys look crazy. Like this is something. And then through them, like through growing up with my siblings, I sort of absorbed a lot of their music and just the general culture. My brother was really into The Crow, so I saw that when I was really young, and just all the kind of aesthetics and music that they were into had a big impact on me from a young age. And I was always really into music. Even as a kid, I wanted to play guitar and bass and drums. So music was like a big thing for me. And I studied music and I did it in school. And then, of course, I was a child of the kind of 2000s era where emo hit its peak. And that kind of dragged me in with the whole like dressing that way, and then obviously makeup. That was when I kind of first started to experiment with wearing makeup and things. But I was also a big fan of like metal music and stuff as well, and I kind of tended to lean towards the more theatrical stuff. Like I was really obsessed with Iron Maiden when I was younger, because they had, you know, Eddie and all this cool artwork, and they would bring out this giant Eddie on stage and stuff. I saw Iron Maiden, I must have been like 5 times when I was a teenager. And then obviously Lordi, when they won the Eurovision, I was like, who are these guys? So it was like just kind of this amalgamation of all these things. And I always tended to lean towards the like darker, spookier, more macabre things, even in music. And then there was the whole Bam Margera and him, the 69 Eyes, like that was huge when we were kids. The Viva La Bam was on TV constantly. So eventually I just kind of teetered slowly more and more into darkness as time went on. I was just more interested in experimenting kind of with makeup and aesthetic. And as I got a little bit older, I kind of leaned away from it because I felt this kind of societal responsibility to grow up, if you get me, and kind of like stop. And all my friends, like who I was friends with at the time, it was like one day I was there and all of a sudden everyone was like not alternative anymore, and I was like the last kind of one. Everyone was dressing more normally and listening to a lot more like dance music and stuff, which I have no problem with. I have a really varied taste in music, but they had veered away from everything that we had shared interests with before. And that kind of had an effect on me then, to feel like I had to also go that way. So I kind of stepped away from it for a while, and all my interests were still the same. I still was into spooky movies and books, and I still listened to the same music, but I kind of started to dress a little more, for lack of a better term, normal. And then when Lynn and I finally got in a relationship, she was like the coolest person I had ever met in my life.
No.
And
No, I was not.
I really admired that you didn't like care what anyone else thought about like how you dressed or the things you liked. You liked the things that you liked and dressed the way you wanted to dress. And that made me feel more comfortable sort of embracing that side of myself again. And that was when I started to wear makeup again and dress the way I wanted to again. Because of course it's easier to do. I'm really lucky that I had you, because then I didn't feel kind of ostracized or alone in that sense. Because it's much easier when you have someone else who is like you. So I'm lucky in that aspect. So that's probably a lot of run-on sentences, but it was quite a journey.
A build-up.
Yeah, to get from where I started to then get away from it and come back.
Yeah, I share a lot of similarities with that. I definitely I got in through gothic metal, well, like symphonic metal, that kind of thing, especially Cradle of Filth. I really loved. I did a lot of Cradle of Filth makeup as like a mall goth, which was kind of cringe, but I liked it at the time. So, what about you though, Lynn?
For me, I started to listen to like bands like Slipknot when I was like 10 years old. I was the eldest, so I didn't really have anybody to teach me things. And where I was brought up, like there wasn't any like alternative people or anything like that. So I didn't really have anybody to tell me about these things. I just came across it on Krang one day and I was like, what is this? And I had to kind of teach myself and find ways to dress like that and everything, especially like growing up where where we're from, there's like not really a big scene. There wasn't back then either. You couldn't really find clothes or anything. So it was kind of hard, but I knew it was something that I really wanted to get into. So I definitely started with more like new metal and stuff like that. And that kind of grew into me listening to Evanescence, where at the time I thought Evanescence was goth. I was like, oh, I'm going a bit darker now with Evanescence. Obviously, then I realized Evanescence is just more like on the gothic side.
Definitely a gateway, though.
Yeah, it was definitely a gateway for me. I was like, oh, I'm more into like spookier, darker music like that. And then Viva La Bam came along for me as well. And that was a huge thing for me. So I started to listen to bands like him, the 69 Eyes, and him listened to a lot of Typo Negative and Sisters of Mercy. So when I looked into their influences, that's how I kind of started to listen to music like that. And then I was really just into bands from Finland because I was so obsessed with Bam. Just like loved everything he did. And then I also had an emo phase like Connor, where I was just into My Chemical Romance and stuff like that. Grew out of that and then was more into him and stuff again. Started with the black eyeliner I did have a bit of a normal phase where I listened to like all different types of music, and then I realized you can just listen to everything. Like I always would be into like Slipknot and S Club 7 and stuff like that at the same time. And people were always like, you can't do that. Like, are you goth or not? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I just like the things that I like, and I never really wanted to put a label on it. And
Yeah.
so then I wasn't happy dressing normal. It was very short. It was like a month-long thing. And I was like, I can't do this. It was around the time when Connor kind of started to change because all of our friends were, matured and wanting to step away from the alternative scene. So I did try it for like a month, and I was like, I can't do it. It's not me. Like, naturally I have dark hair and I'm naturally pale, and I just wearing color wasn't a thing for me. So I think growing older then I got more into the goth music because I couldn't really listen to heavy stuff anymore because I just wanted to chill out most of the time. So like listening to screaming music kind of started to give me a headache for the most part. So I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I just started to listen to like London After Midnight, Clan of Zymox, stuff like that, just in my own chill time. I couldn't really listen to bands like Slipknot anymore. I still do sometimes, but for the most part, I'm kind of wanting to chill on my downtime and listen to bands that relax me rather than heavy metal and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that all happened. And then for now, for the most part, I listen to mostly goth music. And then sometimes if I'm feeling energetic, which is not very often, then I'll listen to the older bands, and we still listen to bands like, well, Him and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, I am also getting old, so I understand.
It's just kind of, I think it's a natural thing. Like I feel like, it does feel more mature to be dressing goth and listening to goth music over the whole emo thing. But I was always like a mix of both. But now it's kind of, I'm more into the goth thing.
It's so funny because I also got really into emo around like 2005, 2006, and my wife makes fun of me every time it comes up. But
yeah, people tend to think you should be ashamed, and I'm like, I'm not ashamed of that, and I still listen to My Chemical Romance and emo bands.
That's good. I think guilty pleasures have always been a frustration for me. I've never liked the concept of the guilty pleasure. It's you like what you like, and
if you enjoy something, definitely you should embrace it. I'm not embarrassed. I mean, I should probably be embarrassed for how I looked.
No, you should. I think bring that back.
Me personally, I had some looks that no one should have let me have. I'm not ashamed of the fact that was the sort of subculture that I embraced when I was younger, because it definitely did help form my interests later, and I do still love a lot of those bands, and I will still listen to them. There's like a big emo revival in recent years with like Midwest emo and stuff, and it's very nostalgic for me, I guess, to listen to those bands on that sound, because it was the formative years of my life that's what I was listening to. So I'd never be ashamed of it, obviously I wouldn't pull the same looks now. I do definitely.
The only thing for me was having like the fringe over the eye so you could only see out of one eye. Like,
it made
that was a bit
too coordinate.
I don't know how I dealt with that one.
Yeah, skateboarding with a fringe over one eye was a dangerous activity. Just zero depth perception.
But we still like get the emo comment all the time. Like the most like used comment we will get is like emo, emo, emo. And I feel like people are saying it to make us angry.
Like an insult.
And I'm just like, you know what? Part of me is emo 100%. Yeah. Like I listen to emo music. Like, I still sometimes I still like to have like an emo type of hair. Like it's not an insult to me.
Yeah, you'll never get rid of that internal emo kid.
It's funny. All the kids that I see at school where I pick Link up my kid from, they also, I think it's their only reference.
It is.
But they also ask me all the time, "Are you emo? You look at that. Look at that emo."
It's been the thing the last probably 5 years or so, because we've gotten that from a lot of our guests. Danny, remember? I think Terry mentioned that.
Yeah.
A lot of our guests have mentioned, getting that as sort of it's now the cat call on the street.
I guess it's better than
is emo.
Manson or Neo from The Matrix, but
Yep.
Well, what we used to get a lot younger was just rocker. I don't know if that was ever a thing in America, but
no.
over here, that was the sort of go-to slated insult that we would get as teenagers. People would just be like, "Oh, you big rockers, like rock on, dude,"
They'd be like, "Rock on," and I'll just be like, "Yeah,
I
feel
will rock on. Thank you very much." But and then this is what I find strange is that for a while, goth was sort of the more relevant term that was flung at people, but now it seems to have reversed to emo, and I'm like, how did we go backwards?
I think it's that South Park one, oh no, they were emo.
Yeah, I think maybe that, and then obviously a combination of like MGK's emo girl song being so popular recently.
Yeah, people sing that to us a lot.
That was so big that I think just in the general public, that's their go-to term now because of that, because we do get that like sung at us a lot in the street. People will just see us.
It's mostly that and getting barked at.
Yeah, that barked at, and then what's the other one? For some reason, Last Resort by Papa Roach.
That's a big one recently.
Yeah,
weird.
That must be a TikTok thing.
Yeah, we would literally be walking down the street, and these like teenagers will walk past us, and they'll just be like, "Cut my life into pieces." And we're like, "Why do they know this song?"
They know all the lyrics, and I'm like,
Yeah. Why do you know all this?
Y2K nostalgia, maybe? I don't know, because that came out when I was in high school. So.
No, these kids are so young. Like, I'm like, I don't know why you know this. It must be a TikTok thing. TikTok is just getting them, more creative with the insults now.
Yeah.
Well, except for the barking. I don't know where that came from. Connor's always confused why I get barked at, but I'm like, it's the color,
I just don't know how it started because it's become so prevalent. It has become the go-to thing. Almost every time we are out in the city now, someone will bark at you. And I'm like, when did this start? Because there was definitely a period where no one had ever barked at me in my life. And now it's such a common occurrence. I'm like, when did this start? How did this happen?
It's really because wearing spiky collars and stuff, and they think, oh, a dog wears that, so that's why they bark.
But I'm like, what was the cultural shift where everyone just started barking out of nowhere? And also, like, why are you barking at people? That is more kind of embarrassing for you than an insult to us.
Like, I just look at them like, are you okay? Why are you barking?
Yeah. Did you ever back in the day before you had, I know I did before I had access to goth clothing, go to like the pet store and look for a black leather collar? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Actually, still, like a couple of years ago, I bought like, I bought a collar, but it came with the lid just because like it came with it. So now we just have that in the room, and we don't have a dog. So people come over and they're just like, because it's like a pink, it's a sparkly pink, because I like pink as well. It's like a sparkly pink collar, but it came with the lid, and anytime people come over, I'm like, I don't have a dog. They're good price though, I recommend.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, on a budget, it will do 100%.
Actually, you know what? That did bring up another question while we were talking about introductions. I was thinking about how your parents reacted, if you got any pushback or ran into any problems with your parents when you were transitioning into an alternative look.
Me first.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, she just looked at me. I was like, okay, I think that's an indication that I meant to speak first. For me, I was very lucky, and I've said this before, that I understand my position was unique and that I was very, very lucky, and that most people aren't very lucky in that aspect. My parents were incredibly, incredibly understanding because I think I was the youngest child. And they had just seen it all by that point. Nothing I was going to do would really shock them because, as I said, my eldest siblings were cure heads in the 80s. They had huge backcombed hair. They wore like thrifted outfits, and they would wear like pale foundation and heavy makeup. And then my closest sibling had a bit of, I guess you would kind of maybe call it a mall goth phase. We didn't really have mall goth here as prevalent as it kind of was in the States and Canada and stuff, but he did kind of have a mall goth phase where he would wear chokers and he had like weird hair, he would like kind of the Lydia Dietz hair where he'd like pull down.
I did that also, yeah.
Yeah, and he would gel it into spikes and pull them down over his face and wear eyeliner, and he would wear like New Rocks and big baggy jeans and stuff. So I think by the time that I started to embrace wearing makeup and dressing differently, my parents were just like, "Oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, here's another one.
Yeah, we've seen this before. He'll grow out of it in a few years." And then they were just like, "Oh, he didn't." One of them didn't. Well, yeah, so I was lucky that they were always incredibly supportive. They kind of, once I was painting my nails and wearing makeup and stuff, they were always like, "Oh, your nails look nice," or "Oh, well, your makeup is
That's
really
wonderful.
well done."
Yeah.
I think music wise, they were always very supportive of me because they knew it was such a big thing for me. So if I was ever like listening to music like really loudly in my room or something, they would be really understanding. They wouldn't be like, "Turn that off." They'd be like, "No, this is his hobby." I would be sitting up here with my guitar plugged into my amp, up full volume, really, really badly playing like him and My Chemical Romance riffs. And they would just be like, "Oh, were you practicing guitar? That's really, really good. You sounded great, So I'm really, really lucky and blessed in that aspect.
Yeah.
And I don't take that, and I didn't take that for granted. I know that there are a lot of people. We've had comments from viewers who have said, like, "Oh, I don't know how to like start dressing like this because I'm not sure how my parents would react, or my parents have told me I can't dress like this, or I can't dye my hair, or I can't wear this kind of makeup." And I can only imagine like how difficult that must be. And I'm very, very thankful that that situation was just so different for me.
Yeah, I definitely had a different situation because I'm the eldest. My parents have never seen anything like it before. So straight off the bat, they shut it down and they were like, "No way, this is satanic. What are you doing? We do not accept Satan into this household." And I was like, "There's nothing satanic about it. Like, I just like the music." Because of course my first favorite band was Slipknot. So that made them scared. So, at first they were just like, please don't go down this road. And I was like, too bad, it's happening. And then over time, I kind of slowly got into it. Like you were saying, people were asking how to do it. Like I would slowly start to ask for black items and slowly started to buy more albums and get more posters and really like slowly do it so they didn't really understand what was happening, kind of just sneaking it in here and there without them realizing it. So at the beginning it was really hard and they really didn't understand it and they thought it was evil and that I was going to change being the nice person I was, because they were like, "You're so well behaved and all, like, why would you want to listen to this music?" And I was like, "There's nothing about it that would make me not be well behaved. I'm still going to be the same. I just want to listen to this music." But of course, then growing up, you're not always gonna be that good, and I did start to do some things like staying out late and stuff like that, and then they would blame it on the music, even though that was gonna happen no matter what music I was listening to. Honestly, the people I was hanging around with, we weren't doing stuff compared to like people that were listening to other types of music. We were very well behaved. So that was a whole thing. When that happened, then they started to take off. They took down my posters off my wall. They put all my clothes into black bags. They told me, you have to be normal because you promised us you weren't going to change how you were acting, and now you're changing it. And it's because of this music you're listening to it, and it's making you angry. And I'm like, no, this would have happened. Like, I promise, like it would have happened anyway. But thankfully, that was something that just happened for one night, and then the next day I woke up and I just never mentioned it, and I took everything out of the black bags and I put the posters back up and they didn't mention it too, so it was really weird. Yeah, it was very strange. I'd have to ask them what happened there, but I think they maybe overreacted at the time, and they probably had a conversation and realized, that all teenagers are going to be acting like this, and that it wasn't because of that, and that this was just something that I liked. And no matter if they were going to let me do it or not, I was going to do it. So that was that. And then I always remember as well the first time my mom brought me out to buy my first Slipknot album. The guy was like, "You shouldn't be buying this." I don't know what age I was, but the guy was like, "You should not be buying this. This makes Eminem sound like nursery rhymes." And I was like, Slipknot don't curse as much as Eminem.
Yeah, Eminem's way worse, I think.
Yeah, and then I just kept going on about it. And then a week later, we went back and we bought the album. And my mom listened to it with me. She didn't like it. So then I introduced her to him. She really liked the band Him. And then she was like, "Oh, some of this music isn't that bad." And then anytime we would go somewhere, she would kind of like to explain to people what was going on with me as well. Like I would go to dance class and she'd be like, "Hi, Lena's here. She's going through a phase right now. Please excuse this phase." And
Yes.
"It's not a phase, Mom, It's not a phase, Mom." And she'd be like, "It's a phase and I'm going to let her do it." So then she was like, "I'm going to help you get this phase out of your system." So that's why she would buy me the albums and she would buy me the clothes and she would help me get this phase out of my system, was her plan. And now many years later, I'm still like this and she actually loves it. She let me like do a makeover and stuff and she really liked how she looked. And she loves listening to the music with me now. And she's a big fan of our YouTube channel. Right now, she's patiently sitting at home looking at our numbers, waiting for us to hit 1K. So she's like, she's like, "I love like, the makeup that you do. And I understand that it takes time." And she's proud of me now. It's just at the time she was scared and she didn't understand what it was about. And she definitely thought it was a phase, but now she understands it's not. So she can't really fight against it, basically.
Well, at least the bags were black.
Yeah, she put them into black bin bags, and I was like, some of my posters were ripped, but I forgave her.
That just added to the aesthetic.
Yeah. Like your fishnets when they get caught on the door handle.
Only makes your outfit better.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still ask us about Satan every day, but
yeah, they do still slip that in. They're like, "Oh, you guys are doing great on YouTube. Well, your makeup, you're so talented. Do you guys worship Satan?" Or
yeah, that's definitely still a thing. They've never got over that because they look around the room and they see like, we do have like Ouija boards and stuff, but we don't use them. We just like to look at them.
I collect them aesthetically. I really like Ouija boards. But obviously, to the average person, when they see a Ouija board, they're like, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean? And I'm like, I just think they're neat.
Yeah. Well, you did mention earlier that there isn't much of a scene there. And I did want to ask that question about what options are available for concerts and clubs and meetups. And also, I was wondering if there are any, assuming there are some, what kind of music gets played, what's popular at those events, and like how many people show up, that kind of thing.
So for Ireland, it being quite a small country, we were kind of doomed from the start because the smaller the country, I mean, goth and alternative is always going to be a small percentage of the overall population regardless. So it was really, really small. Growing up here, especially, it was rough because Ireland has a tendency to be a few years behind everywhere else anyway. So when we were growing up, we had one store, and we live in the capital city of our country, and we had one store that had alternative clothes. Now you could obviously find bits and pieces in other places, but we had one kind of dedicated alt shop growing up, and
we still do now.
Yeah, kind of. We've 1.5 now.
Okay.
We've got 1.5. Because the original one has kind of branched out into other stuff, but it still has a little corner of alternative, and then we have a new dedicated alternative store. So 1.5, 1.33 maybe. Well, yeah. So growing up, it was there wasn't much of a scene, especially for young people. We would get the occasional big concert, with people like Iron Maiden or The Cure or things like that, but it was few and far between. And honestly, up until very, very recently, there still wasn't much of a scene. And I know we've said it before in videos, and I don't want to rag on the country, or I kind of hate painting it out in that light, but it is sort of up until very recently a country that had very, 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 very small areas where the scene was alive. And if you ventured kind of outside of any major cities, it was few and far between to find any alternative people. But luckily, in recent years, it has kind of caught up. And I think it's a combination of a lot of things that has kind of brought it to life. Obviously, there's more concerts now, which I think is bringing more people out, because pre-COVID, we were very, very lucky to get any bands that we would be interested in. If you were into a very niche band, odds are they were not playing Ireland. Like, we had the occasional like random show. I remember Combi Christ were here, Aesthetic Perfection were here.
I don't think we've ever been to a goth show though.
Up until recently, yeah. Well, you'd have like the occasional pop-up shows, but nothing really. And when it came to the scene and club nights and stuff, we had kind of one regular club night that ran sort of bi-monthly, and then we had another club night that would pop up once every few months. And there was a very, very long running, I believe, I'm probably going to get this wrong, and someone listening to this podcast will probably correct me, but there was a long running goth and industrial club night here that we unfortunately never attended. It ran from, I think, the early to mid 90s into the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, called Dominion, but that unfortunately no longer runs. But then thankfully, I think two things happened. One, people were doing more because they wanted to take advantage of, being able to go out again and go see concerts and stuff. So promoters were more willing to take risks on bands that they probably wouldn't have before, because more people are going to concerts and buying tickets to see these shows now. So there's some promoters here that are rolling the dice on bands that they never would have done like a few years ago. So we're getting more shows. Like just this year, we had Planet Zymox, Christian Death. We've got She Passed Away coming up soon. Oh. The end of last year, Molchat Doma were here. So we've had a lot more like niche goth bands coming as of recent. And then I think the other thing is that obviously through COVID, TikTok became so popular, and everyone kind of started using it during COVID because they had nothing to do. So, and people were like, oh, check out TikTok. And I can only, like, the amount of people that turned around to me and was like, oh, are you on TikTok? It's amazing. I just sit watching it all day long. It was just so prevalent. And I think that because of TikTok making alternative subcultures so much more visible, especially amongst young people, there is slowly a resurgence in goth and just general alt interest in the younger people in Ireland now. I'm seeing a lot more groups of young teenagers who are dressing goth or dressing emo, or even kind of like mall goth looks are appearing on the streets of Dublin nowadays. And through that, they are actually becoming interested in the music and the subculture. And that means there are more kind of young people coming to club nights and concerts, because I remember pre-COVID, we would go to goth club nights and you would kind of see the same groups of people at every one. It would be like 30, 40 people who were at every kind of goth club night, or every like show catered towards maybe not particularly a goth band, but like, as I like to call them, goth adjacent bands, like any kind of like synth gothic metal, symphonic metal, or like synth wave kind of artists, you would see the same crowds. Whereas nowadays, I'm seeing a lot of new faces, a lot of younger people at these events and club nights. And we're kind of lucky now in that we are starting to get more club nights devoted towards goth or industrial or even EBM. We have a bit of a selection now, especially in comparison to how it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So we've got a semi-regular sort of gothic and dark night, which was running monthly, and now it's on a hiatus, but I believe it's going to return to doing monthly. And then we have another one which is kind of more sporadic, which is it kind of comes up every like few months, maybe every like 4 to 6 months. Darklands is the one I'm thinking of.
Never heard of it.
Or Dark Side, Dublin Dark Side, maybe. They kind of tend to be more sporadic, but they are the people, I believe, who ran the Goth Club night that we used to regularly attend a few years ago. And they went from being sort of regular to being more sporadic. And they have a real varied musical playlist for the nights. It can start off with a lot of goth rock and post-punk and dark wave. And then as the night goes on, they kind of rotate DJs, and you might get a DJ who's very into industrial, and then I know 2 DJs who are very into EBM and will play a lot of that kind of stuff towards the end of the night as it gets a bit later. And then we have a newer club night that Lynn and I actually haven't had a chance to attend yet, because it just has this terrible coincidental tendency to run on days when we're like either away or we're busy doing something. But that is specifically a queer alternative night for goth and alternative people. And it seems to be drawing like quite a big crowd of people.
We're actually finally going next month for my friend's birthday.
Yeah, we will finally attend. I can't wait.
I'm not sure what the music is like, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it looks fantastic, and it seems to be drawing in, as I said earlier, a younger crowd of alternative people. And yeah, like you said, I was going to say, I'm not quite sure what the musical selection is at it, but we'll report back after we've finally attended in a month. But it does tend to be varied in general here. There's no kind of like, dedicated, we only play dark wave or we only play goth rock. They do tend to rotate DJs at most of the club nights, and the vibe changes as the night goes on. But I've noticed it does kind of lean more towards goth rock or just post-punk and 80s. You'll get some new wave introduced in there and maybe some dark wave. And then at some of them, they might slip in a little like more modern kind of alternative rock or metal or things like that can also make an appearance.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. It's a big mix.
I love that no matter where you go in the world, the goth night names are always the same.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Sisters of Mercy song, something with the word dark in it. Like they're always like the same cliche.
So
I love it.
The 3 in particular I'm thinking of is Dance to the Underground, Dublin. It's either Dublin Darklands or Dublin Dark Side. I should really know. And then the other one is Dungeon 59. So I'm like, they're not doing too bad on their naming.
Well, we have, what's the other one? It's like PH something. We met somebody at one of the shows and they gave us a card for it. And that's like, I don't know, it's randomly coming up. There's a lot of nights kind of brought from America to us as well. And we recently had some goth DJs from New York, I think. We were working, so we couldn't go. So we have people kind of trying to bring over the goth like club vibes from, well, anywhere in America, really. We're trying to kind of get that over here.
Nice.
We also have the Vampire Masquerade ball.
Oh,
here.
the Endless Night.
The Endless Night ball, sorry. But it's very different for us, so.
Yeah, it's nowhere near as I feel dedicated as it is in the States. When it comes here, it tends to be kind of more of a strip down version of
We've
it.
only been to one, so we don't know what it's going to be like this year, but I know that's coming up soon. We have like 2 big goth events coming up soon. And that one is one we're excited about. And I think, I can't remember the artist. It's like Nosferatu something. There's a lot of artists as well coming over from America and stuff like that, because, you know, they're trying to share a bit over to us because they know we don't really have a lot here. So at the moment, it's really booming. There's a lot going on. Like, we're very surprised. We don't know who's actually booking all these goth artists. We want to find out who's doing this and be like, thank you, because Planet Zymox were like one of my most listened to bands in the past few years, and I didn't think we were going to get to see them, let alone interview them. So and they sold out as well. I'm really happy. Yeah, so that happened recently, and they actually sold out the show, and they were surprised. And we were surprised because we're like, there's a goth scene here. Like, we didn't know about this.
Yeah, that was funny. When we were interviewing Ronnie, he had actually mentioned, because I said to him, this is your first ever show in Ireland in 2023 when you've been in a band for X amount of years. And he had said, yeah, I was always told that there was no scene in Ireland and not to bother coming here because you won't sell tickets and no one will show up. And he's like, but here we are, and we sold out. I think the venue was either 350 or 400 cap or something like that. And he's like, look, clearly there's a scene here and it's alive. And I'm like, in recent years it's grown exponentially and it's been amazing. And that show in particular was one where I really noted that there was a big mix in the crowd of sort of the familiar faces from Goth Nights, and there was a surprising amount of a younger crowd there. So that was really, really, really
so
great
we need to stop saying that there's no scene here, because bands are hearing that and then they're not coming here. There is a scene. I think Goths like to hide a lot. Like, you know, like for the longest time we didn't really have any goth friends or anything, and like we actually went to a Motionless in White show, which I think a lot of goths listen to Motionless in White, so we made friends there, and they kind of showed us around the scenes and showed us some of the goth nights that we didn't know about. And we were like, whoa, we didn't know that you people existed. And it's like, yeah, you know, we like to stay in, watch horror movies, read books, listen to music, and kind of stay to ourselves until, you know, we get out to a show.
Now I'm going to get Motionless in White hate mail. You can't talk about them on a goth podcast. What are you doing?
Really? I'm surprised because I've heard the complaints the other direction. Like, oh, they are goth.
Oh, really? I've never heard that. That's
the thing is, like, we had a conversation about like Chris is goth, because Chris listens to a lot of goth music, I think, for the most part. And, like, obviously Motionless in White, I definitely don't think they're a goth band, but they are influenced by goth music, and I think that's probably why a lot of goths listen to them.
Yeah, I think it was just maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago when they started getting popular. A lot of people weren't goth were like, oh, this is my favorite goth band, and they had no other connection to the scene, and so there was a lot of backlash, you know.
Yeah, that was definitely an issue. And I think now as well, like, their music has changed a lot. I'm not too into them anymore. The music they make now, I don't even know what I'd call it, but back in the day they made more spookier things.
Oh, okay.
Their latest album, they actually did kind of like a synthwave, like new wave metal mashup song and stuff. It was really interesting, and I have a lot of respect for them. I know they get a lot of hate, especially I do understand, like, in recent years when people were like, oh, Motionless in White, my favorite goth band. I do understand why it elicited that sort of kind of reaction. People are like, they're not goth, you know, and they were like tired of hearing about it. But I have a lot of respect. I enjoy them. I genuinely enjoy their music, and I respect them as musicians. And I do think they lifted a lot of elements from goth and the goth subculture, and in a respectful way, because as Lynn said, Chris is a goth internally, 100%. His music taste and his fashion sense and his makeup, you know, it's definitely, he's a true and true goth. He just happens to be in a metal band. But I do understand why it can be frustrating for some people when they're brought up and they're like, they're not a goth band. You know,
goths would never argue about what isn't goth music. I don't know what you're talking
about.
No,
I've never heard that in my life.
It reminds me of when I was in high school and I was into like Christian metal, there was a lot of argument about, are they Christians in a band or are they a Christian band? It's like,
yeah.
I don't know. I just like the music, man. Who cares?
That's it. Yeah, like you like music, you like the music. That's all that's important.
Well, let me ask a little about Random Goth Couple, because I'm curious how. What inspired you to start the channel, and how did you did you come into it with an idea of what you wanted to do, or did you kind of figure it out as you went along?
So to answer your question, no, I had no idea. So it kind of was a series of events that led from one thing to another, that led from one thing to another, and then we ended up here. It was never a calculated decision it's not like we sat down and said, hey, let's be YouTubers. You know, there was never that discussion. It was never planned out or thought out or anything like that. It was a very natural progression to how we ended up here. And what that was that we were traveling a lot a few years ago and finally going to see all the places that we had wanted to see for years. Like we were going to Salem, and we went to Halloween Horror Nights in California, and like Disney Halloween, and we went to the Warner Brothers studio tour at the Festival of Fear and stuff. So we were going to see all these like really cool places and things that we had wanted to see for years and like dreamed about going to see. And we got back and we were like looking through all of our pictures and videos and stuff we took, and they were just awful. They were just so bad. The quality was terrible, and we were kind of upset over how we wanted to be able to look back on these memories, and I'm like, they're in 140p, you know, like, so we were planning our next trip, which was to go to Japan, and that was a massive thing for both of us because we had dreamed of going to Japan our entire lives. We were both big fans of like Japanese culture and anime from even as kids. So it was such a huge deal to us, and I was like, well, we can't let this happen again. If we're going to Japan, we need to capture this sort of correctly or just even better. So for Lynn's birthday, before we were going to Japan, I bought her a camera, like a real camera, a good camera. And I was like, this will help because one, we can record everything if we want and in good quality, and we can take great pictures while we're over there that will still look that good in like 10-20 years. And Lynn was you had like a following kind of on Instagram already at that point, and people were always expressing interest in kind of what you did or wanted to see what you were doing. And you obviously had an amazing fashion sense and would take pictures of your outfits, and I was like, this will help because now I can take pictures of you with the camera and they will be better quality and stuff. So I got her that camera for her birthday, and the original intention was kind of for Lynn to use it for the most part.
It's like, it's a really small camera as well. Like, and you're saying it's a good camera, but it's not like really.
No, it wasn't like a crazy expensive camera, but compared to our phones, it was like a massive step up.
Yeah, but the funny part is that's the camera we still use today.
We still use that camera now. We have not upgraded.
Yeah, it's so funny because we have it so long, and it was really just because I'm not very strong, so you got me the best camera you could get that was small and I could lift, and that was why we got that camera. Like, and if you wanted the camera
really
yourself,
good on your videos,
surprisingly, and it's a decent, like, do you want to tell us a bit about the camera? I'm like, I don't even know what it is, a Canon M50 or something.
Yeah, look, you do know what it is. Yeah, it's the Canon M50, and it has been a great workhorse over the years, and it does in certain situations it can look great, but I think I have definitely stretched the limit of the quality we can achieve from that camera, and I'm at a point now where I think we do need to upgrade at this point, because I can't make this camera any better at this point. I've done everything I could. But yeah, that was the original intention. I got a small mirrorless, not heavy camera so that Lynn could use it. And I was kind of encouraging her to vlog, I guess, in a sense, or just take videos for Instagram and stuff. But Lynn still couldn't use it. She was still.
I was like, this is still too heavy.
She was carrying it around for like 5 minutes, and then she'd be like, "Oh, this is still heavy. My wrist is getting a little sore. Can you take it?" So I start then kind of taking over recording, and you were a little shy, I think, when it came to speaking to a camera. You still are, I think, yeah, to this day. You were kind of shy and afraid to talk to the camera. And I remember encouraging you, and literally
I would just cry.
Yeah.
He'd be like, "Come on now, tell the camera what we're doing today." And I was like,
I literally have.
I really wanted to, but I couldn't do it.
A distinct memory of sitting with you with the camera, and you being like, "Oh, I can't talk to the camera in public." And I was like, "Why? Why do you care what anyone here thinks?" And I literally.
It wasn't about that.
I stood up. And we were in like a big, massive crowd of people. And I stood up and I pointed the camera at myself and was like, "Hey, we're here at this thing and we're doing this and blah, 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 blah," like really loudly. And like no one cared. Like no one even looked at me. And I was like, "See, like no one cares what we're doing." And you were like, "Yeah, but you're really good at that. So why don't you just keep doing that?" So we started to, I was trying to figure out kind of how to use the camera at first, and it made just sense to me. I suppose I had absorbed so much of YouTube over the years that it was just imprinted in my brain to kind of like vlog in that way. To just point the camera at me and speak was just the default kind of thing. So we started to do that, and at the beginning it was just really small stuff we were doing, and we were actually recording kind of like our lives. And we recorded stuff with like our family.
Yeah, we recorded like a day at the farm and stuff, because our YouTube channel was mostly just for our family to be able to go and watch the videos. But then people started to come and watch our videos. So we were like, "Oh, we probably should get rid of this," just because, you know, like my sister's kids and stuff were in the videos. And like, I don't think she minded too much, but I wasn't sure how I felt on that. So we took that down, and then we were like, "Oh, like people are watching the video." So that's kind of when we were like, "Oh, people are interested and maybe we should change things on the channel."
So yeah, we did take a lot of our early stuff down just because it was, for lack of a better term, just really like personal stuff. You know,
it was your standard home movie type thing. Just for you and your family.
And then once the video started to pick up steam and people actually started to watch them, we were like, "Oh, now we should probably actually do this. We should maybe actually like make videos because people are starting to watch them." And then at the time, my whole thing was I just kind of wanted to do when we were traveling and the things that we were seeing and all these places. Like I never wanted to be a sit down, you know, bedroom talking head YouTuber. It was never the intention. But 2020 happened and the channel really started to blow up in 2020. And I was still going through and editing a backlog of videos from when we were in Japan, and I was uploading them through 2020. And that was when we really started to get attention and the viewers started to go up on videos. And I was like, "Oh, well, we're YouTubers now, I guess," because people are watching the videos. So now we should make videos. And 2020 being 2020, we couldn't, you know, travel or go and see things. So we start making these videos sitting in our bedroom, kind of figuring out what we were doing. And that's just basically what happened over time. We kind of just accidentally became YouTubers. So we just continued.
Yeah.
We continued and we continue to this day.
Mm.
And now our channel, I feel, has become such a mix of stuff because we're back doing our original intention where we're traveling and showing off these cool things, but then we're also still doing like our bedroom videos and our fashion videos. And obviously this year we've started doing like interviews with artists and stuff.
Mhm.
So it's just kind of progressed out naturally over the years to what it is now. It's kind of like anything. I feel like anything that has happened to me in life has sort of just happened naturally. It just
we never
progressed.
really sit down and decide on
Make
what
a
we're gonna
roadmap.
do. Like,
Yeah.
like it's the same. Even like people say, like, "Oh, how do you become a goth?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not something that I ever sat down and taught myself and
Made a
kind of
vision
sat
board.
there." Yeah, made a vision board. It's something that happened naturally, and I try to do that with everything in life. Just let life just happen, and anything that happens will be a natural thing. And I don't try and like really plan, which I probably should do more of. I try not to plan stuff, and just things come naturally, like the interviews and stuff that just randomly happened, and we kind of just take things as they come.
Not to put you on the spot, but very quickly, what are your favorite animes?
Oh, that is putting us on the
I know.
spot. I have a default answer usually anyway. So big fans of Black Butler. I was really into
Black
it a
Butler's
few years
great.
ago.
Yeah.
It's a good introduction into anime, and there's a new one coming out soon.
Another, you showed me another.
It's a
That
horror
was
anime.
fantastic.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one. It's a car anime?
Oh, it's
Okay.
really good.
Yeah.
Yes,
Horror.
definitely.
Horror, sorry.
Okay.
Horror. Well, it's not. It's like, what is it actually? It's like
a mystery horror anime. It's definitely horror because a lot of people die. So, and
It's
some
a
of it
gory
can be
anime.
like, it's gory. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Definitely recommend checking that out. That's fantastic. We
Does
both
it compare
really
to Elfen Lied as far as violence and gore?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember watching that when I was young, and I cried, and that's when I realized anime gets so serious.
Yeah.
Because I started watching like Death Note and stuff. Obviously, that was the first one I started to watch, and then Elfen Lied, and then I was like, "Oh, what's happening?"
Well, then you just have to watch like a slice of life anime to cleanse your palate.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to have the in between.
It's so hard to know though. Like back then when we were watching anime,
Yeah.
like, well, I would just watch it without knowing about it, so that was a bit risky, and sometimes it would end up like
Full Metal Alchemist breaks your heart.
The kind of best balance I think is Monster is probably one of my best balance animes. But it's got the horror element, but it's very realistic and real world.
Yeah, we try and watch anime. It's just I feel like it takes a lot of time.
Oh yeah,
for some reason.
It does. Yeah, there's an investment there. There's a whole series.
Yeah.
It's not just like popping a movie. You're invested with seasons of episodes.
Well, I'm not a big fan of dubbed anime. I would 100% prefer to watch subbed anime. And the problem with that
exposed.
is listen, however you want to enjoy it, you enjoy it. But for me personally, sometimes I find with the dubs, the voice acting,
it does depend.
It's just, it doesn't suit, or it's kind of corny or something in comparison.
The art of voice acting is taken much more seriously in Japan. Well, there's that, and then the American dubs, it's not a full voice acted thing. It's just they're trying to capitalize on something that's popular. So they do a real quick and dirty, put English on top of it, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
So my problem then is that the free time I generally have to watch anime with like the two of us is usually when we're in bed. Like we'll have, like 40 minutes, an hour before we're going to sleep, that I'm like, okay, we'll throw something on and watch it. And the problem is with that, if you're watching like a subbed anime and you're in bed, it takes so much focus because you have to like read while you're lying there. So it can be like more effort then, especially if you're really tired and if you nod off for 1 second, you've like completely lost what's happened. So that's unfortunate that we haven't watched as much recently. I'm trying to think of the last thing we watched. Maybe Chainsaw Man. Spy X Family.
Chainsaw Man.
We watched Spy X Family a few months ago, and that was pretty good. And Chainsaw Man was okay.
All right, well let me get back to goth stuff here.
We need more like goth anime. I think like Black Butler is like gothic, and I'm like, I don't know if there's any like
Maybe...
Obviously then we have characters like Misa and Death Note, like gothic Lolita and stuff like that.
Yeah, you've got Witch Hunter Robin.
Yeah, Seraph
kind of in that.
Seraph of the End is kind of gothic. The one about
like vampires.
Yeah.
I still need to watch the Castlevania.
My god,
everybody's telling
Castlevania.
me.
Castlevania.
I need to pick up the later seasons because the first season was fine, but it didn't grab me.
They get way better.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Because I was like, nah, this is all right. But yeah, I'll have to. check
I
out
watched
the
like
later
2
episodes.
and.
So unfortunately, what happened was I started to watch it with Lynn, and you watched the whole first season with me.
No, I didn't.
It's only like
Did I?
Yeah,
like
the episodes in the first
I
season are like 10 minutes long or something, or 15 minutes long or something. So Lynn watched the first season with me, and then the second season came out, and you had no time to watch it, so I watched it by myself.
Yeah.
And then I was waiting for you to catch up with me, and you never caught up with me. And now I'm like, I don't want to keep going. I think I watched the third season without you then as well, but I'm waiting for you to catch up. And to be honest, I will just rewatch it from the start again with you because it is that good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
A lot of people loved Vampire Hunter D back in the day as well.
Back in the day, I liked that.
Yeah.
That was back in the day, I liked it. But I think back in the day as well, I didn't have a lot of options.
Yeah. Okay, well let me.
Goth stuff, spooky goth stuff.
I did want to ask about specific videos, or I guess the series of videos you did about the React videos with the 80s and 90s interviews, and just sort of if you gleaned any insight from going through those as far as changes or similarities in goth over the years.
Definitely. I think a point I've made a lot of times with these reaction videos to 80s or 90s goths is that it really exemplifies how timeless a lot of the look is, because you're watching these videos, some of them 1983, some of them 1986, and you could pick those people out of that video and drop them in the modern day, and they would not look out of place. You would definitely see a lot of the same looks, makeup styles, like clothing styles. You would definitely still see that today. So it's endearing to see that it hasn't changed too much, and that those looks really stood the test of time. But I think one thing that definitely has fallen off, maybe not entirely, but to a massive degree, is the color palette has shifted significantly from back then to nowadays. Because looking over all those clips, you will see people wearing so much color. There will random pops of color in their outfits, sometimes fully colorful outfits. You'll see people with leopard print like scarves or pants. And I suppose a lot of that came from how close it was to punk at the time, and punk was a lot more experimental with colors and different things.
The general 80s aesthetic towards neons and bright colors as well.
Definitely. Not just even in the makeups, you see a lot of that, like kind of neon,
almost even more in the makeups
kind of thing.
But I mean, in these days, you do still kind of see that. You'll see someone with an all black outfit, black hair, like nearly all black makeup, fully white foundation, and then they will have, kind of like neon eyeshadow or something like that. You'll still see that occasionally nowadays, but what you don't see is just the vast color palette that people's outfits had back then. They would wear purples and greens and yellows, and they would, and not even just as accent pieces on their outfits, it would sometimes their whole outfit, you would maybe have one bit of black and everything else would be colorful or like patterned fabrics with like weird designs. And like you say, it was the 80s, and that whole color block design thing was really popular. There was like so much neon everywhere, but I do think it was a really cool aspect of the subculture that slowly over time got kind of watered down. And I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I have such a muted wardrobe. It consists of maybe 4 colors.
I wouldn't be interested, to be honest.
I wear black, white, red, and gray. You know, like that. That's the extent.
You know what I think that was? I think that people used to borrow from their parents.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's something that doesn't really happen, not on the streets of Dublin anyway. Like a lot, you're saying like it didn't change that much and that you could spot that. But I think now obviously people are actually buying stuff, and yeah, people get thrifted stuff from the thrift store, but you didn't have much of an option when you were taking it from your parents. So I think your parents had like the leopard print and like stuff like that, and that's where that was all coming from.
I 100% understand like why the shift happened, because obviously it is a much more dramatic, bolder look if it's just black on black. You know, the contrast with if you have pale white makeup. I understand that that's more striking to a degree, but it is kind of one thing that I do miss and that I admire when I'm looking back over those videos, just the variety of color palettes that they kind of had back then. They weren't afraid to mix in those things.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that stood out to me was the fact that people in the interviews, they did not want to be called goth for the most part. Like they'd be like, and would you call yourself goth? No. What would you call yourselves? And some of them would be just like, I'm just a person, like I don't want to put label, or they'd say like cure heads a lot for some reason. They'd prefer to be called cure heads. I don't know, did they mostly, because they mostly listen to the Cure. I'm not sure why they were so against being called goth. I'm not sure what was happening there, but I know even growing up for me, like labels were a bad thing growing up. Like we didn't ever like to put labels on ourselves, and people would ask like, are you emo, are you goth? And I'd be like, well, I'm just me, you know. And that's something that I would like to still bring on today, but at the same time I understand that, you know, labels help us meet other people on the internet. Like, you know, using the goth hashtag helps people like with like-minded interests to find you and stuff like that. But other than that, like I don't really like it, and I understand why back then they didn't want to be labeled as just one thing.
Now you need to cultivate your personal brand.
Yeah, exactly.
It was even a thing in the mid 2000s with emo, when emo exploded and all those bands would be asked like, oh, are you an emo band? And they'd be like, no, we're not emo.
I mean, the same with goth bands.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's the same.
They don't want to, they're like, no.
The same thing happened then. It was like, no, we don't want to be labeled. So
yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree.
It's definitely a musician thing. I don't think I've ever heard any interview with any musician who liked to be given a genre label. They're like, no, I just want to do my own thing. I want to make my own music.
Well, I think part of it too was, as far as fans are concerned, was that the goth once you labeled something goth in the 80s, it was probably a lot more limiting, because I think you did have a wider variety of music. When obviously there's like The Cure, The Smiths, Susie, Sisters, whatever, but people were listening to like Public Image Limited and Bowie and Lydia Lunch, and like even bands like 45 Grave that kind of were ushered into the death rock thing. And I think if they started now, people might not really call them a goth band. Or even like Bauhaus had a lot of experimental art rock, like dub stuff that doesn't get as much play anymore. But I think it felt too limiting when there was such a kaleidoscope of music at the time.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's why bands as well, they kind of want to stay open to everybody. So they don't want to put themselves into the one box. And that's why they're like, no, we don't want to call ourselves goth, because we want everybody to listen to us.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I read, actually, I was reading this academic paper from Trevor Bamford, and he was interviewing goths in London that were talking about, he interviewed them recently, but they were talking about moving from the 80s into the 90s. And a lot of them talked about how there was a shift from listening to bands towards more of a focus on DJs and dressing up and being an individual instead of being band focused. And a lot of what they cited for that was that in the 80s there was a big like mainstream media radio magazine, Top of the Pops, focus on goth like bands, people, post-punk bands. And into the 90s the mainstream media moved away from that, so it became a lot harder to find music because you had to like create these subcultural micromedia word of mouth kind of things. And so a lot of the goths started putting more emphasis on fashion and literature and like intellectual stuff and vampires, because it was and it became much more serious for that reason as well. Some of those people said, because the music was much more difficult to find. And actually, speaking of vampires, since we were talking about that with the anime, I know in the 90s, 2000s, that was a big part of the goth scene. And for me, it was as well, it was. And I'm wondering if you two also kind of embraced that as part of getting into goth. What kind of vampire stories, or what part of that was relevant to your goth, identity?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I'm definitely every day influenced by all vampires. But I think growing up, every vampire in the world,
every day,
the vampire listening to this right now,
every day I am influenced
come out
by
wherever you
vampires.
are. I think like even growing up when I was really young, it started off with a cartoon called Mona the Vampire. I don't know if anybody knows about
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, I'm not.
Oh, that was a British TV.
Yeah,
it was a British cartoon. I had a feeling it hadn't quite made it over.
Oh, definitely check it out. Like, or maybe just, growing up, I like that. And that was from a really young age. And straight away, I was like, I want to be a vampire. And I made my own fangs and everything. Like, so then I started like,
you made your own fangs. That's impressive.
I like made them out of paper.
Okay, excellent.
So, it wasn't great, but yeah. And then like there was the movie, The Little Vampire as well, and he also made his fangs out of paper and then used ketchup and stuff, which that was gross. I didn't do the ketchup thing. Ew. But like seeing stuff like that from a young age, I was like, I'm a vampire, because I was always like super pale and had black hair, and people would always like call me Casper or like call me a vampire. So I was always like, I don't mind being called those things, like I love vampires. So then growing up, after that, then of course, then I came across like Interview with a Vampire and Queen of the Damned and stuff, and that playlist alone really, I think, was a strong influence on who I am today. I still listen to the playlist all of the time. Like my makeup and what I wear is very influenced by Interview with a Vampire, Queen of the Damned, and the books, and just anything Anne Rice. And I'm trying to think then. So then I was more into the vampire thing, but then I feel like that just comes into the goth thing naturally. I feel like that's kind of what happened. But yeah, no, 100%. Like I feel like I want to be a vampire just every single day of my life. If I could, I would just dress like a vampire.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. See, the thing is as well is that we're Irish. And Ireland was the home of Bram Stoker and Dracula. So it was a big influence, I think, on me as well growing up, because I remember for some strange reason, we have Dracula in our St. Patrick's Day parade every year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
For some inexplicable reason. I mean, I'm assuming because it's celebrating all things Irish, and they're celebrating Bram Stoker and his contribution to literature. So I remember being a kid, and my parents would take me to the St. Patrick's Day parade every year as a kid, and I would be so excited to see Dracula, because he would just stroll around being so mysterious and spooky, and he would come up to the crowds. And I was obsessed with vampires from such a young age. I would always read like little mini horror short stories for kids about vampires, and like you said, The Little Vampire and stuff was a big thing, and Mona the Vampire as well. I love that show growing up. So it has obviously influenced us to a large degree. I would definitely say you more so than me. I was a big fan of Buffy and Angel as well growing up. I love those TV shows. So I think that was a big one for me. And then I remember watching Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't influence me as much now, not to the same degree, I think, as it does, say, you. In my fashion sense, I tend to lean a little more away from that nowadays. Definitely a few years ago, it was a bigger thing for me, but they will always be my number one favorite monster. And I
Oh
love
yeah.
vampire aesthetics. Anything vampire themed, I'm always just 100% about. So it definitely does influence us in our daily lives, as Lynn said. We wake up every day and are influenced by
Well, yeah,
vampires.
every day. Like we would sleep in a coffin if we could. Like
Very true.
we have a coffin here, but we tried to fit in it and we couldn't. So
So I
Yeah.
was looking up Moto the Vampire since you mentioned it, and it looks
Yes.
like they do have full episodes on YouTube. So
Yeah.
Amazing.
easy to watch. And looks like it was a Canadian show originally.
Wow.
What? Really?
Yeah. It looks like it was
No
tried
way.
they tried to shop it in Britain and didn't get any bites, and then okay, pun not intended.
They said
But
it
then we went-
sucks.
It sucks, yes. But then they went and they
Oh.
shopped it over to Canada, and Canada released it. So
No
origin
way.
was
See,
Canada.
we had like
I think it was
four.
a book as well.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
could get the books. We had 4 TV stations in Ireland when we were kids, and 2 of them were the national, like, Irish broadcaster TV stations. One of them was the Northern Irish one, and the 4th one was the British one, and that was where we would like get all of our British cartoons and stuff. And I remember Mona the
Yeah.
Vampire being on the BBC for kids
Yeah.
during the day when we were younger. So
Yeah.
that's why I thought it was like specifically
It's honestly
a
a really
British
good
TV show.
though.
Plus, the show is aesthetically, it seems very British, just with the way
Yeah.
the houses and stuff are even built.
I can't remember.
But it's a great. Now, bear in mind, it's a children's cartoon, but I would still recommend definitely watching it. It's a very cute, wholesome TV show about a little girl who thinks she's a vampire.
Yeah, like I was just encouraged by her, and like she would have like spaghetti bolognese, but like call it like eyeballs and worms or something. So I'd be like, to my parents, I'd be like, I want the eyeballs and worms, and like, and then like I would just leave the Halloween decorations up all year round, and that's kind of when like things started to get spooky.
Yeah, I'd definitely be checking this out. Looks like a lot of fun.
What year
Let
did
me know.
that
Let me know
come
what you think.
out?
99, I think it looks
Oh,
like.
okay.
I'm just going off the Wikipedia page.
Don't age
You
us.
just-
Don't age us.
It's like you look it up and you see, and you're like, Lynn, you were 20 years old. What are you talking about? Asking your mom to make you spaghetti. Like, I'm pretty sure I was young.
No, it reminded me because there's another Canadian animated kind of a kid show called Ruby Gloom that was out in like 2006.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was another one as well. There was like a hotel for zombies and stuff like that. There was a lot of those cartoons that I really liked growing up that definitely encouraged me to the darker side.
Yeah.
And then I feel like as well, like I was kind of shown some horror movies at a young age, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how this all happened. I think I strongly believe if I hadn't seen those movies, I don't know
Maybe
how I
it'd be
would have
different.
turned out.
I don't know about that though, because the Addams Family movies were
Oh, yeah.
massive when we were kids. Like
Mhm.
they were huge. They were everywhere. So I think it would have happened regardless
Yeah.
because that had such an influence on me, definitely as a kid. I was obsessed with the Addams Family.
I never seen it as a kid.
Wow, that's crazy
I
because
know.
it was everywhere. It was on TV like every month.
I don't know. Maybe I have no idea.
Yeah, I
don't
watched a
remember.
ton of the original TV series when I was real little, and then got into the movies because they came out close to when I was in college. But I did enjoy the movies, but I loved the original TV series.
No, that's
I
good.
feel like
ahead.
everyone has their Addams Family. Like every generation has their Addams Family now, whether it
Yeah.
be the original TV show, the 90s movies, the cartoons, the like CGI one. I love how it's like
Or
it
Wednesday
brings
now.
yeah, and now Wednesday is the current one. So I love that how that brings all the generational gaps together,
Mhm.
their shared love of the Addams Family, whatever rendition of it may be.
the last few weeks and on Saturday morning, I've been watching the original Addams Family with my son, and like making. I have a little waffle maker that makes them into pumpkins.
Nice.
So that's been our like Saturday morning.
That's awesome.
That is
That's so
adorable.
cute. Like that's such a memory that you will just remember. Like growing up, you're like, I remember watching the Addams Family and like they were the pumpkin waffles.
Yeah, it's
That's
really
so cute.
sweet. Since we were talking about the 80s, there was this TikTok video I saw where somebody was making the argument that goth is dying because most goths they know or talk to or see online only talk about music from the 80s, and those are the bands that are going viral online as well. Whereas they said if you talk to punks or metalheads or emos, they're mostly talking about current bands that are supporting the scene. So I thought it would be interesting to get your thoughts on like if you think goths are too concerned with classic music to the detriment of the current scene right now.
Well, I think yes and no to a degree. I do think it is semi-true, but I think the problem lies in another place. So, yeah, like you said, the focus in goth does seem to gear way more towards the legacy bands than it does in any other kind of music-based subculture. You get a lot more of them like focus on the older bands than you do kind of the newer bands. But then on the flip side of that, I do think that we have a lot of new goth bands that have been accepted and embraced by the scene. Like even from the past decade and a half, you've had bands like Lebanon Hanover, Twin Tribes, Drab Majesty, Molchat Doma, She Passed Away. All these bands that have come up in, like I said, the last decade and a half have definitely been sort of embraced by the scene. And I do see their names get mentioned a lot.
There probably should be more, though, to be honest.
But my issue is that those bands, while they were accepted and embraced by the scene, and they are newer bands, and I don't mean this in like disrespect to these bands at all, and I think in fact some of them wholeheartedly embrace it, is that if you didn't know any of those bands and I played you those bands and I told you that those bands were from the 80s, you would believe me like with no problem. So all these bands are sort of emulating the sound of the 80s, and that's why they have been so readily accepted into the subculture, because they're not straying too far from the sort of blueprint that people have in the subculture as the accepted music thing. So I think the problem more so is not the focus on the 80s bands. I think the problem more so lies in that the reluctance to accept bands into the subculture that are a little more out of the box or experiment more stylistically, music-wise. And that's the problem, because if you look at any of these other subcultures like emo or, like you said, metal, if you hold up a modern metal band that metal fans are a fan of and praise, and you hold them up against a 70s or an 80s metal band, yeah, they might both have harsh vocals, and yeah, they might both have distorted guitars, but stylistically, they are very, very different music. But nobody turns around and says that this new band is not a metal band. You know, they still appreciate that they're a metal band. They still classify them as a metal band, even though they're almost vastly removed from, say, Metallica or any of the new wave of British heavy metal bands. So I just don't see that enough in the goth subculture, because people fight so much about what is and isn't goth, and it's only allowing such a small amount of these newer goth bands to be accepted because they don't sort of go too far off the track as to what goth is or should be. I think with dark
Because does
wave,
anybody really know?
yeah,
Like,
I think with dark wave, there's a lot more there's a lot more room to kind of be different and be more experimental, and people will still sort of accept that. But in just kind of straight up gothic rock or post punk, or I mean, I like to see that a lot of shoegaze and things like that that are more experimental. Like if you have like blackened shoegaze and stuff, like really heavy, like or I'm not sure what we've settled on the term for that is. I've heard like death gaze and stuff. Both bands like that have definitely sort of bled in under the radar because their style is inherently more experimental. But just in general, it seems like the bands that people accept are the less experimental ones, and every other music genre is moving forward and is experimenting and branching out, and that's all being accepted by their subcultures. So I think the problem with goth is that we're taking too hard a stance as a subculture on what we should or shouldn't accept as goth music.
Controversial take. That's very interesting. I like that.
I'd love to hear that.
What do you think, Lynn?
I knew no matter what I said, it wasn't going to go down well. So I said I made open the floodgates.
Lynn, did you have any thoughts or?
I don't know. I'm like, I in a sense, like I kind of agree with you, but also, yeah, it's really hard to pinpoint what is goth, because if someone's trying to make music and they're looking at goth bands to take inspiration from, and like you're looking at like The Cure or something, and you're like, I don't understand, like they make all this music, which one is goth, like what are their songs? But then it's like, if they were to make that exact song without that song existing, would the goth community accept that song as goth? Probably not. So I think, yeah, that could be the problem. But at the same time, you don't want to go too far from the bands that we already have, because then, like, what is goth? Like if you're going to change it up a lot, then it's not goth anymore.
Well, I would rebut that with if you look at metal music in particular, if you take Megadeth and you hold that up against Limp Bizkit, stylistically, they're both very, very different bands. However, they're both metal bands and they are metal music. So there is definitely room within a genre to take something like the original kind of blueprint and expand on it with newer things and still be within that realm.
Yeah,
you can try to do that.
I guess the counterpoint on that would be that with metal, yes, you take, those two bands you mentioned, they're very different bands, but they also have been given very specific subgenre labels, whether they're new metal or Nwabum or, thrash, death gaze, doom jazz, whatever. There's all of these subgenres and subgenres of metal. Electronica has the same sort of habit. That doesn't really exist in goth as a concept, I guess. There's this goth umbrella that includes bands that are not goth, where you'll get your shoegaze and your ethereal and your cold wave,
although
EBM,
that kind of
all those things
now, but yeah,
kind of are under this umbrella of things that goths like, but they're not part of they're not subgenres of an overarching genre. They're just sort of these are bands that goths enjoy.
Yeah.
And I find that while goth is a music-based subculture, it's not quite as genre fixated as some other ones. Like a punk subculture is very fixated on this punk genre, which is a very specific thing with its own variety and differences. But goth is a music-based subculture, but it's not so focused on this specific genre, and it's more just a web of genres that tend to be following, and this is something I'm still trying to struggle with. Is it an aesthetic? Is it a sonic quality? What is it that makes all these bands similar? I like them all. Other people like them all, but I've yet to see a really convincing and good definition of what is the cohesive, what is the germ inside of these bands that make them make the subculture gravitate
I
towards.
mean, we have heard a lot of arguments for what that should be.
We have,
yeah.
But like I said, nothing satisfying to me, at least.
Yeah.
I think it would be the sound over the look for sure, because I feel like all the bands, they don't really, I don't know. I've seen a lot of comments, especially on my recent post on Instagram, where people are like, that band isn't goth because they don't wear makeup. And I'm like, what? And then they're like, you're not goth because you wear too much makeup. People are so, and this is on this, like, this is just like one comment under the next, and I'm just like, people are so confused on what goth is, and it's just such a mixed take on it. And obviously, yeah, it just comes down to the music and how the music sounds, and there is a specific goth sound.
It's vibes.
It's fine. Vibe based subculture.
Yeah.
You will know
It's all
by how you
vibes.
dance.
Yeah.
That's how you know if it's a goth song. Because
Yeah.
are you going to do a goth dance to it? If you're not, then it's not goth. That's the test.
I absolutely love that line. Goth is a vibe-based subculture, and I 100% agree.
Well, I mean, we do have a shoegaze night, monthly night in Chicago, which is interesting because the two people that DJ it are goth DJs and goths themselves, but then the crowd tends to be a mix of some goths and then
Mostly
people
not.
that look like they're into shoegaze is most of it. But you do get a mix, which is interesting because it is that there has always been that gray line of bands that are, you know, are they goth? Aren't they? This song is, that song isn't. I mean, I'm just glad that we're not in the 2000s anymore where you go to the club and everything is synth pop and industrial and nothing else.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I've always wondered, you know, what's the through line between Alien Sex Fiend and Dead Can Dance?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're not going to answer that now because
We're not.
we literally had almost an entire episode on that before.
We've had a couple of them, I think.
Yeah. I do the other thing I would say, I think, is that as far as the argument about does it support the scene or not, because I think goth has always been past focused, or at least sort of taking ephemera from the past and then modifying it. Like
There's a backward looking aspect.
Yeah. Like Catherine Spooner, who's an author, said something to the effect of like goth is a series of revivals that reinvent and breathe new life into what happened in the past. But you also have, it's not just like the past is some static thing, because you do have bands on tour like Sisters and Gene Loves Jezebel and March Violets and Corpus Delicti and Eva O. So if we're, you know, if they're still touring and people are going to see them, that's also, I think, counts as supporting the scene as well, because, but you do obviously you do want to see new music and new bands. And I think we do have a huge variety of new bands. There's obviously fewer immediately recognizable names. Like I think you kind of listed most of them, Connor, but there are a ton of them. And even you brought up Molchat Doma, like their popularity was almost exclusively based on going viral on TikTok.
On TikTok,
so
yeah.
I know, I think it's a blend, and I think I think both of those things can kind of exist. It's, you know, I've been listening to like Spelling recently, and in the past I've listened to bands like Zola Jesus and stuff like that, which are not goth bands, but they have that almost like that dark kind of like in the lineage of Cocteau Twins kind of thing going on. And those are always exciting to me to listen to these bands outside of goth, but that take kind of like how you were saying with Motionless in White, take those elements and do something different with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for them to exist, because then you do get an influence back on what, if you want to say, proper goth bands as well. Like we talked about a few episodes ago, how there was a year in industrial where industrial bands started doing dubstep drops in their music.
Yeah.
So you do get some of that crossover.
That in particular is always very funny to me, because if I'm listening to like an industrial playlist on Spotify and I hear that happen, I immediately know like what year that song came out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, in the sense of the subculture as a whole, is it killing the subculture or is it helping the subculture or anything like that? Yeah, that's important points that people should discuss and care about. But realistically, at the end of the day, if you as an individual, me personally as an individual, I don't care, you know, like if I like a band and I listen to that band, I'm gonna listen to them, and it doesn't bother me at the end of the day whether or not people consider them goth or anything like that. Like you said, it's a vibe based subculture. So if I listen to a band and I love their vibe, I'm gonna listen to them, and
Yeah.
I at the end of the day, I really don't care what classification they fall under, and nobody else should
I
either.
guess we have to wait and see what happens.
Mm.
It's the only way I've known. See if it grows or not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, it's definitely, because I remember before, like 6 or 7 years ago, back when maybe like new goth and pastel goth were kind of a thing, there was kind of a dearth of bands. There wasn't anything new. And then the kind of post-punk thing happened, and then we had tons of bands. So I think the fears of Goth Dying have been greatly exaggerated, but
Oh yeah.
I was gonna say it's really more about whether new and younger members of the subculture are being brought in. Doesn't matter what music's being focused on. We just need to make sure that all the subcultural members aren't in danger of dying out. We've got new influx of people continually, and if they are also just interested in the 80s music, that's fine.
yeah.
It's harder to sustain because, you know, as music gets older, it's harder to get new people to come in for the old music. And we've definitely heard those complaints of, I can't be a goth. I don't like goth because I don't like 80s music because it's bad produced, or it just doesn't have that modern sound that I crave. But as long as you do have more people, new people coming in, the scene, the subculture is not dying.
I think we need more bands like the Virgin Prunes. Say that.
Yeah,
I do
the
like the
Virgin
Virgin Prunes.
Prunes.
Yeah.
Irish represent.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was this whole time I'm like, when can I mention the Virgin Prunes?
It's funny though now how often I see their name come up, because they didn't exist for a very long time, and they came from Ireland, you know, such a small place, but it does seem like they had such a dramatic and lasting impact on the subculture as a whole.
Yeah.
So we should be proud of that. We did. Ireland as a country.
I'll start mentioning that more now.
Ireland as a country gave the goth subculture Dracula and the Virgin Prunes. So I mean, for a small
and
country,
Halloween
in general,
Yeah,
we
that's
don't
right,
take credit for anything over here.
Is that
So
a big?
We're doing all right.
Is that a big cultural event there?
It's
No.
not.
Unfortunately, not.
Not to the degree of the States and Canada and stuff. I think America in general has a tendency to do that. If it takes like some sort of celebration from another country, it always does it in like the biggest possible way.
That's why we
As long
always
as
go
we can
to
include
America
alcohol.
to celebrate.
Yeah. Like even with St. Patrick's Day, which is arguably, you know, like our biggest holiday where the most kind of stuff happens. I look at America and I'm like, man, those guys are going ham over there, you know?
It's something I'm always really angry about. I'm like, come on, people, celebrate. It originated here. Like, we need to be excited, but Halloween like really died out in the last few years, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like it was bigger when we were kids.
It was.
And the focus has fallen off a bit.
Kids don't even really trick-or-treat anymore.
Yeah, kids don't really trick-or-treat as much anymore. The focus tends to be more on, you know, adults going out to clubs and drinking.
They don't even dress up.
And now they don't even...
Halloween, it's like me and my own dressed up.
Now they don't even bother to dress up. But there are like pockets of stuff that are really, really cool here. Like, I know up in Derry, they do like the big Halloween celebration where the whole town like celebrates. We have something here in Dublin called the Bram Stoker Festival, which is a celebration of like Dracula during the Halloween period, and they run lots of kind of events around the city. They have like a Victorian playground, Victorian carnival that they do for kids and stuff, and there's like ghosts, like real life ghost story retellings on the streets and things.
Oh, I love that.
It is celebrated, and there are things that happen, but just not to the degree that it used to happen, and definitely not to the degree that you
even
see
with
in
like
the
people
States.
decorating like their houses.
Their houses,
stuff.
it doesn't happen as much anymore.
It's like one pumpkin in the window. I'm like,
That's
come
so
on,
sad.
people. It's
Yeah,
really
come
sad.
on, like they were 2 for €4. Like
That's why every year we're like, we make sure to go somewhere else. Like we went to Japan, America. Like we don't like to stay.
yeah,
here.
we try not to be in Ireland for Halloween. we try to experience it in other places because it's usually a much
It's always really
bigger
sad.
celebration elsewhere.
Well, at least you don't get people asking if you're going to dress like a normal person for Halloween, because I get that at least once a year.
Yeah, we get that. We get that in comments as well.
We
on
just get, it's
YouTube.
not Halloween
Oh.
yet. I'm like, I know when Halloween is. Okay? Leave me
If
alone.
anyone
Halloween
would
is
know.
every day.
Yeah.
I
Also,
throw-
I need to know what autumnal drink you have.
Well, so it's just a pumpkin spice latte because I'm a basic bitch.
Wait, did you make it yourself?
No, I bought it at Starbucks.
Oh, we don't do we have this now?
I don't think they're in here yet.
I don't think we have any yet.
I think it's September they start here. You're jealous. You're very jealous, are you?
Also, just so you're not confused, when we were talking at the very beginning, and you brought up the Lydia Dietz bangs, I found a photo of myself from my mall goth years that I sent on Instagram because it reminds me. So it's not like some random.
I turned my but if I'm just like checking my phone later, I'm like, what the hell? I just totally forgot.
You did a similar thing with your hair for a video though, didn't you?
Oh my god.
Yeah, I saw that one, yeah, which was hilarious. That's when I thought of it too. I was like, holy fuck, I did that.
Oh, that's sick though.
I love this look, honestly. I'm like, bring it back. Come on. Let's go.
Yeah, we're big mall goth fans. We're not gonna lie.
I'm honestly like into everything though. Like about every fashion, to be honest.
It's it does feel kind of redemptive as well, because when I was doing the mall goth thing, it was definitely looked down on and made fun of by the other actual goths. So now that it's cool again, it does make me feel kind of good. But
yeah, that's I think I said something along those lines in a video about mall goths, about how people who were originally mall goth nowadays get to see it come back into fashion, and they get that sort of redemption of being like, oh, now I can sort of embrace this again if I want to, because it's cool again and I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm proud of it. And I definitely lift elements of mall goth into my daily fashion 100%. Like I don't go like whole hog, like the full what I maybe would have done in 2002 if I was American, but I definitely take pieces from it that I still really, really love. I think it had its charms 100%.
I love the lunch boxes.
Yeah. I have a Crow
like,
lunchbox that's signed sitting over here, actually. One of those metal ones.
So cool.
How can you drop such cool information so calmly?
All right. Well, so the last question I'll ask then is based around this video posted by Annie is Undead, where they were talking about goth as basically separating into goth as a subculture and then goth as an aesthetic being two different spheres of identity, because you have popular influencers selling goth kind of as a commodity, and then so that popularity of the aesthetic kind of turns into its own community apart from goth subculture. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts or experiences on that.
I think for the most part, when people ask us about, wanting to be goth but not liking the music and wanting to dress in goth fashion, I just always say like that, you can always just say that you're into gothic fashion rather than saying goth, because like, goth is about the music, but you can wear like gothic fashion, unless like people want to wear like Susie t-shirt or the Cure t-shirt, but you're not actually listening to those bands, then I find that really weird if that's what people are talking about. But I know people really want to be a part of the goth subculture but don't like the music for some reason, and I'm like, well, it's just as easy as saying gothic instead of goth, like you could just use the gothic hashtag, and because people are really worried that people are going to come for them if they're dressed and they look goth but they don't listen to the music. And I just like to tell people, like, it's fine to dress like that, you just don't say you're goth, just say you're gothic or you're into gothic stuff. Well, I'm not sure about the whole other thing. Maybe Connor has something to say on that. Like, I know there's like the whole commercial thing about it, where like we try our best to kind of stay away from that, but it still happens as far as like doing like clothing hauls on YouTube and stuff like that, and showing like the more expensive brands. Like we always wanted to show more DIY stuff, but it's just that takes more time to film and it's harder to do. And obviously, like, we're just so excited to have brands reach out and want to work with us, because it's not something that happens too often for people that are making goth content, just because we don't really get like the normal sponsorships that another YouTuber might have. So these are like the main like sponsorships that we would get, unfortunately, is like, you know, clothing ones where people might see that and think, oh, we have to like wear like Pungrave and Killstar and stuff to be goth. And that's something that we really don't want to push out. And we're really trying to work towards showing people how to make your own clothes, how to do goth in a cheaper way and stuff like that. Like we have the videos being made right now
for the past 6 months.
Yeah, I don't. It just takes a lot longer, unfortunately, to film these videos. But it's something that we really want to work towards, because I know there's a lot of YouTube channels out there that just focus on goth
clothing hauls.
They say goth clothing hauls, but I call it like gothic instead, you know?
I think it's we've always kind of emphasized how you don't need to wear these like fashion brands and stuff to be considered goth, but that they're not inherently harmful to the subculture, because if you want to buy something from these brands and wear it because you don't have the time to DIY your stuff, or because you just particularly like a piece, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the proliferation of kind of goth haul videos, especially with the recent introduction of, you know, like Shein and Romwe and stuff like that, you find these YouTube channels that they're solely devoted to every video is just, oh, a haul from this one, a haul from this one, a haul from this one.
Yeah.
And I think, that does unfortunately send like a mixed message to maybe younger, more impressionable people who are trying to get into the scene. But like Lynn was saying, as alternative creators, you do have a much smaller pool of kind of people you can work with. So we always try to do it in moderation. And I think that as a whole, is it separating from the subculture to be separate from the fashion in a sense? It's kind of inevitable with anything in this day and age. We live in the year of our Lord 2023. Social media is absolutely everywhere. Everything can be accessed at the touch of a button so easily. And that has its merits, and obviously it has its cons, but you see these people obviously sharing their looks on TikTok or Instagram, and it's reaching so many more people than it would have reached, you know, a few years ago, pre-social media time. So people are influenced by that, and they, without maybe having a grasp on the subculture or what it's about, just like the fashion and then want to wear it from seeing other people doing it. And I think, in and of itself, that's fine. If you like something and you want to wear it, go ahead, you know, like no one's going to stop you. But like Len said, if you consider yourself gothic instead because you're not actually interested in the subculture, whether that's through not knowing or just a genuine disinterest in the music and stuff, that's fine too. But it was always going to happen. I mean, we even watched a clip recently from a documentary from London in the late 80s where they were going to speak to these independent markets and designers of gothic and alternative fashion. And even then, and I might be wrong, but I think it was 1987, they were being interviewed for this documentary about the designs they were selling and the fashion that they were making. And they made the point that high street stores had already started to mimic them, and where people were coming and inspecting this and then lifting the elements from it and then sort of using that in mainstream fashion stores. And that's always been a thing, especially with high fashion brands in particular would always kind of take streetwear or alternative subcultures and lift elements from them and introduce them into their own like catwalk shows for Fashion Week. It's always been a thing. And I just think in recent years, because people are kind of more fashion conscious or more obsessed with fast fashion, especially in recent years, these trends are coming and going quicker, and you're seeing lots of reproductions of high fashion brands. They're cycling through these things so much quicker. So I remember 4 years ago, the theme of Fashion Week was something along the lines of like leather vampires, and that was basically just
leather vampires,
and it was
it's a weird way to say goth.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like you'd see the Paris Fashion Week and all the catwalks and all these like huge brands had people wearing like PVC and leather and chokers and trench coats, and they had like the Susie eyeliner and stuff, you know, and because these cycles are becoming shorter and shorter, because unfortunately that is just the direction the world seems to be going in, where everything has to be so fast paced and nothing seems to really last, and it's like on to the next thing and on to the next thing, that we're seeing it come up more and more frequently, to the point that a lot of goth and alternative fashion has kind of leaked into mainstream fashion. And it's a scary thought in a sense to me, because thankfully I don't have to deal with this, because one, we're older and we have each other. But to be a young person nowadays, it must be really difficult and confusing to find people that you genuinely relate to. Because when I was younger, if I saw someone with a nose piercing, or they were wearing Doc Martens or a band t-shirt, I had a 99% chance of having stuff in common with that person that we could speak about or bond over. But nowadays, because everything is so like fast fashion based and stuff, it's so readily available to people, and they see someone on TikTok with a nose ring wearing a beanie and Doc Martens, and they say, oh, that's cool, I'm gonna get a nose ring and wear a beanie and Doc Martens. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they don't relate to the culture that it came from. So as a young person nowadays, if you were to see someone who dressed like you, there's a really high probability that they don't share any of the same interests that you have. And you could go speak to them and be like, oh, you're wearing this, that's cool, do you like this kind of music? And they're like,
the worst part is sometimes like I've had this happen where they look at you and they're like, ew, you're a freak, just because like they could wear the exact same thing as me, except for I'm wearing like a bit more of an extreme eyeliner, and they'd be like, oh, freak, and I'm like, what? I'm so confused right now.
Yeah, it's like people, regular normal people are out on the weekend wearing, you know, like corsets and like bondage gear as accessories, but then they look down on alternative and goth people and think we're weird because they're just doing it because it's the current trend in fashion, but we're doing it because we actually like it. So for some reason,
well, that's the thing. Like, I'm all for letting people do what they want and not interfering with what people are doing, as long as it's not hurting anybody. But the main thing was growing up, like I said, like from the age of 10, wearing like, for example, Converse, and then years later, people, like everybody else, started to wear Converse, and back then they would call me a clown. They'd be like, oh my god, like I remember one girl specifically was like, they're clown shoes, ew. But then years later, they were all wearing they were wearing Converse because they were trendy. And that bothered me, because I'm like, I was wearing this back then, and you slagged me like for wearing fishnets, for wearing Converse, and now you're wearing it because it's trendy. And that's when it started to affect me, because I was just like, that's really annoying, you know? Like, I'm all for letting people do what they want, but to be, what's the word, like, just so
judgmental?
Not judgmental, just like,
it's a hypocritical sense of judgmental.
Yeah, it's so hypocritical to laugh at my clown shoes. Now you're wearing the clown shoes. Like,
everybody wants a goth girlfriend now. Yeah,
and everybody wants a goth girlfriend now. And then like we spent years being bullied, and now I'm just so confused by the comments because I don't know what's happening. Like,
So to cap off that point in an almost positive light, I would say one can only hope that this sort of amalgamation of all this coming into mainstream cultures and people dressing in this way, you could hope that the one positive thing that could come from it is that it leads to more acceptance of alternative people. Because if people don't see, and I know it's not happening currently, and we're still getting judged for it currently, but over
We're wearing the
time,
same code
yeah,
and being judged somehow.
over time, you would kind of hope that as the younger generation becomes more used to seeing this kind of thing and experimenting with these fashions themselves, that they would more readily accept alternative people for dressing how they want to dress and looking how they want to look.
Yeah. Well, I also think that there's kind of also, those are all very good points. I agree with everything you said. Actually, the interesting thing to me, well, a bunch of interesting things. The Gothic versus Goth thing is interesting to think about the etymology of that, because I also have made a similar distinction between Gothic and Goth. And I've had people message me and say Gothic was still, in some cases, I think especially in England, mostly in the past, but a little bit now, kind of used synonymously with Goth to mean the same thing.
Well, we were just talking earlier when we were referring to the 80s videos, how they refer to themselves as Gothics.
Yeah,
so I mean,
Gothics.
that's right back there with the origins.
Yeah. So I guess it's a cultural
I don't
thing.
think people should. I mean,
yeah, I don't think nowadays it's as sort of that's a very good point. And yeah, I remember watching back in an 80s video and seeing them refer to themselves as Gothics, and I was like, that's so cool. I feel like that's almost better than Goths.
Yeah.
Well, because it's less used now, so it feels more.
It's more interesting,
mysterious.
It feels more interesting, yeah. But I do think that in this day and age, people know Goth is a subculture and Goth is the thing, and obviously using the Gothic like ick suffix will make people think, oh, so it's like Goth related, it's like Goth, it's derived from Goth, and it's not so much if you're saying Gothic that
but then
it has to be Goth. I think your point stands that if you
we could try and make this a thing
we can try do this.
People also like to comment and tell us about like how Gothic is more about like Gothic architecture, or like they bring up like
Gothic literature,
just the history of Gothic, and that's a whole other thing.
Well, even for that, we get comments all the time. There are people that say the true Goths are the people from like hundreds of years ago who were the Visigoths. Yeah,
you hear it all.
I mean, if you talk the etymology, Gothic came from Goth, but then Goth came from Gothic, because Gothic was relating to the barbarian tribes that were the original Goths.
Right, but it bears no relation to today.
I mean, it bears an etymological relation.
Yeah.
They all had a reason why they chose that word, and so we have a tie from the current subculture all the way back to there because of these tenuous ties. But that is a purely etymological evolution. It has nothing to do with an aesthetic or ideology when it comes to Goth now versus Goth in the Roman sacking times. There's nothing aesthetically tying them or ideologically tying those, other than this chain of word choices that have happened to the language. It is pedantic, and I'm a huge fan of pedantry, but still,
I think if anything, that proves that language changes over time, and that it could be transferred to mean something else. It doesn't have to be forever glued to the subculture. Like, we can separate Gothic into its own thing, not even so much its own thing, but just to mean, it derived from or semi-related to, but not actually a part of the Goth subculture.
Right.
As long as Goth stays just Goth, though.
Then or we just change the name of everything.
No.
Let's workshop some new names for us.
I had a similar thing when I was getting into Lolita fashion, where Lolita fashion have very strict rules.
Yeah.
And I'm not about rules in fashion. I like to mess around and I like to mix up fashion and stuff. So, you know, I was getting some comments about that, and I didn't really want to have anybody say anything about me. So I just started using like J fashion, so like Japanese fashion, rather than saying Lolita fashion. It was just a way of me still getting to wear Lolita fashion without having Lolitas tell me, oh, you're not supposed to be doing this or that, you know, because then I'm not saying it's strictly Lolita. I'm just saying that it's J fashion, it's Japanese fashion. Like I bought it when I was in Japan, you know, because you need to have like specific silhouettes and like certain shoes and a blouse and everything like that. And I wasn't trying to start any trouble. So I was just like, you know, if I continue wearing this fashion, I can just hashtag it as J fashion or Japanese fashion.
And then you're not stuck in the confines.
So you're not stuck with the rules of, you know, Lolita fashion or, for example, goth fashion.
Yeah.
It helped me for the most part because, you know, people kind of stopped being on my back about stuff then.
It's funny as well, I've noticed that in Germany in particular, they tend to say like the dark subculture, like, you know, it's like the dark overall, like dark alternative fashion and things like that. So that could be like the umbrella term where it's not particularly related to goth as itself, but that it is under the umbrella of similar things or fashions or music.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also an interesting, I mean, similar to language, an interesting point to culture about how it is kind of embedded in local and national and international conversations and culture. And so it's going to vary from place to place. And it's kind of, you know, kind of to the point about people being upset about, oh, well, you know, there's all these unboxing videos. And so people are going to assumedly watch that and only think that's what goth is. I mean, there's a whole range of people that could be watching that. It could, like you said, it could just be people who they just like to jump between fashion to fashion and that's their thing. Or it could be goths could be watching it and also consuming other content. I think my gripe, which I think is similar to what you said, is just that I think you also have to have some, if it's your channel or your content, there has to be some other conversation about if it's, you know, DIY or fast fashion or music or whatever, so that you're not just putting it across as a commodity, like a goth in the box thing, where it has none of the subversion or substance of the music relating to what you're doing and calling goth. I think that's where I run into issues with the creators themselves when it's just that. But
yeah, I was talking to Connor about that recently as well, just about like, you know, we do want to talk more about goth music and we try to make as many videos as we can about goth music, but it's really hard because, you know, you're not actually able to listen to goth music or like, react to music videos and stuff like that. Like we do have some stuff coming up and we're doing collabs that allows us to do more stuff like that, but it's always really hard to actually work around that and to make sure that we, you know, don't get in trouble with YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube itself isn't conducive to music-based kind of videos and discussions as a platform, and it's really unfortunate. And I've been claimed on YouTube videos for the dumbest things, you know, like if I'm just walking around somewhere outside and there happens to be like a 3-second jingle on a radio behind me or something, all of a sudden my video is gone. It's blocked in several countries. All the advertising revenue is entirely gone, you know, so it's really just not conducive to music-based like discussions or like listenings, you know, and that's unfortunate. And I think we've struck a good middle ground with one when we're covering like festivals, because it's live music. You can get away with putting in a lot more because it's live and it won't get claimed and it won't get blocked
a lot
anywhere.
Of people are commenting saying thank you because they found bands through that.
Yeah, so every time every time we do like festival videos and I have footage of the band, I always make sure to put the band's name like really like visible on the screen. And we got comments recently saying like, thank you so much for always having the band name on screen when the bands are playing, because I've found like so many cool bands now through that. And then I think the other half of that being that we're now doing interviews with artists and stuff. So even though we're not able to play their music or like listen to their music and review it, at least through the interviews, people are being then exposed to these artists that we like and can find their music through that.
Yeah, because I'm always like, oh, I want to do a video of us like going to the concert, and he's like, what would the video be? Us walking to the concert and then what? Because
10 minutes of footage.
You can't really show the bands, or like for example,
and they
like
can only be a certain length for every clip.
Or a lot of people want us to record like going to a goth club, and I'm like, well, first of all, I'd have to check with every single person in there to make sure it's okay to record, and like the music would be playing, and it would be great. Like, we do want to do more videos, kind of like the videos that we've been reacting to, as far as going out and meeting people and talking to them about their style. So hopefully, you know, in years to come, people can look back on our videos and see,
and we'll be the time
how style has changed.
Well, it's hard too.
That's one way of showing.
Because I mean, I do like, I haven't seen all your videos, but I really love the like slice of life content, like the golf video or the gingerbread house or any, you know, I like the concert stuff too. And
thank you. That's very reassuring to hear. I'm glad someone is watching those.
Oh wait, have you seen the video where we carved vegetables for Halloween?
I did. Yeah. It was a while ago,
good,
but
good. Yeah, it was a while ago.
No, but it's hard for me, at least, because when I go out, I kind of feel like I want to just go out and enjoy it, not make content for it, you know? So that's another.
Yeah,
unless that's a definite aspect that is hard to get to grips with, because you're correct in saying that like you want to enjoy it, and by creating content you're not enjoying it, like it's in work, a sense, because you are working, and it takes you away from the experience. And like all these things that we've done where I've vlogged it with Lynn, it's not to say that I'm not having fun and I'm not enjoying these things, but I'm not as present that I would be if I didn't have the camera. So it's a hard balance to strike, and there's definitely been times where I've said, okay, I'm putting the camera down now to actually live in the moment. But it is a difficult balance to strike, because obviously when we go do things, I want people to see them because they're cool. That's why we're going to go do them, because we think they're interesting. But at the same time, I also have to enjoy them. You know, it's my spare time to a degree that I'm spending on this, that I want to be able to actually enjoy it as well. So usually I reach a limit on a day where I say, okay, I've gotten enough footage today. I'm putting the camera away. I'm not taking it back out. And we've missed stuff because of that, where you've turned around to me and been like, oh my God, like record this. Or afterwards you've been like, I can't believe we didn't have the camera for that. And I'm like, well, that's a sacrifice you have to make to actually kind of relax and enjoy yourself at these things.
Well, once we all have the implants,
kind words.
Let us record everything we experience. And create it later.
Or did it? I say to Connor, did it even happen? If you didn't record it and tell people.
Didn't record it, didn't happen. No picture, it didn't happen.
No, like I was saying, like next year, because we've covered Marilyn a couple of times, so we said next year, you know, we're gonna try to see take things where take it easy and still definitely record it, but just not as much, just so we can relax a bit more.
Well, let us all know. Let's wrap up here. Let us know. I'll have links in the show notes, but if you can share like where people can find you on YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. I think it's all Random Goth Couple, right?
Yeah, I think we're really blessed in the sense that we somehow got Random Goth Couple as our handle on pretty much every social media. So Random Goth Couple on YouTube, Random Goth Couple on TikTok, and Random Goth Couple on Instagram. And then we have our website is randomgothcouple.com or randomgothcouple.store. And then we have our link tree, which kind of leads to like everything. But YouTube mainly, please.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for being so generous with your time. This was an absolute delight for me. I really enjoyed talking with you both. So yeah, thank you so much for hanging out for such a long time.
No, thank you
thank
so much for having us. It was an absolute pleasure, and we really, really appreciate you bringing us on. And we had a great time too. It was a delight to speak to you.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Obscura Undead's very own Azzy Bats with All Goth Considered.
Greetings, Azzy here, and you're listening to the September 2023 edition of All Goth Considered with Obscura Undead. This month's a short one with 2 bands from the US, 2 coasts, 2 solo artists, 2 badass people. So refill your wine glass, teacup, coffee mug, or water glass, and let's dive into these dark waters together. Starting off on the near opposite end of the coast I'm on, the East Coast, we're stopping in Boston, a city which is becoming a must-watch location, just to catch a glimpse of what's coming out of there. From Boston is Allie Frost, who on October 1st released her debut EP, Deadly Desert, on Peruvian label In Club Records. Frost blends goth rock and bass riffs with darkwave melodies with ethereal vocals to create music that feels kind of liminal, which matches honestly pretty perfectly with her lyrical style, which conveys the same sense of dissociative in-betweenness. Off the new EP, Allie is going to tell us about The Story.
The Story is a song that I wrote a couple of years ago when the pandemic first hit. It's the most club-oriented song I've written compared to my other songs, but I was really feeling like trying something new at the time while still keeping my own individual style. Lyrically, The Story is about what I think is something we all go through sometimes. It's about people who misrepresent who you are based on their own narratives. This could be strangers on the internet, family members, longtime acquaintances, colleagues. Humans are just so complex in our relationships with others, and unfortunately, there are people who will never care to know what a person is truly about. Their story remains, doesn't matter what you do, is a line pretty much meaning even if you're a saint, you'll always be bad in someone else's story. This song is included in my first EP release with In Club Records, a label based out of Lima, Peru, and it can be found directly on their Bandcamp page.
Friends could never hide a
And because we are rootless and always on the move, we find ourselves now in Salt Lake City, Utah. There, Nyx Linnea of Cemetery Siren is spinning webs of pain into cloth of silver. At times homeless and recording tracks literally in their car and in whatever insulated contraption they can build out of junk and blankets, Nyx's singles to date are absolutely captivating. With so little, they combine the sounds of Switchblade Symphony and Cinema Strange. And this latest track, it's not so latest. It's maybe, I think, about a year old at this point now, but I recently heard the story of it, and I reached out to Nyx to share it with you. If you've ever felt hopeless and lost, you are not alone, but Nyx says it better.
My name is Nyx Linnea, and I am the writer and vocalist behind Cemetery Siren. Nothing Left was from a particularly dark time in my life. I was left homeless and struggling to survive after fleeing an abusive relationship, and it felt as though there was really no end in sight. In March of 2022, I was asked to open for Vision Video. I wrote and recorded the instrumentation for Nothing Left in the week leading up to that show, debuted it at that show, and I intended it as a hint at what I was planning afterwards. During that show, however, something changed. Friends and other performers shared my set online, and the support for my project started just pouring in. Afterwards, we all went to the cemetery as a group, and all the love and laughs that we shared gave me the strength to carry on and see where this thing goes. About a week after that, I recorded the lead vocals in a friend's living room, and I released Nothing Left as a home demo. I have a few new singles that I'm working on right now, as well as the beginnings of my EP, which will be based around my past and the trials of overcoming and surviving abuse. The support for my music has helped me carry on despite everything that I've faced, and I really hope that my music will help reach other people who need support and help them feel less alone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me speak about my project, and I hope you enjoy what I've created from my tribulations.
And yet again, we've reached the end of our time together, friend bats. Let me know what I should be listening to. And if you like the show and want to support me, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/obscureundead. Alright, friends, take care of yourselves. Love you. Bye-bye.
All right, welcome to the post-show musings, as I sometimes call it. I just wanted to share a couple thoughts that I had while we were recording that I didn't get to, and kind of reflect on the idea of goth as a commodity, because I do think goth has become mediated and moderated by capitalism. But I also think goth is a subversion to capitalism. And I think goth exists as a music-based subculture, and as a lifestyle, and as a mindset, and as a variety of structural resonances that make up a sociocultural whole. I think all of these complementary and contradictory enactments of goth exist because those enactments are lived out and brought forth by various agents acting in the world in their own entangled, enmeshed, historically situated material ecosystems. This shouldn't be much of a surprise if you've listened to this show before. I won't dive too deep into the metaphysics of how worlds are concretely made through co-evolving relationships. But if that does sound interesting to you, check out our previous episode this year called Enacting Goth. But I did want to, with this podcast in general, I think, and on this episode, what I was trying to do and wanted to do when this came up was question what ways of being goth are we maximizing and minimizing. And I think the enactment that I have a problem with is what we've been talking about, presenting goth as centered around obtaining a product, especially when the creators of this content don't share any critical commentary on the broader impact that this consumption has or the social implications that it has. And I think this curates an ontology aligned with the values of the capitalist marketplace. The only way to minimize that enactment of goth is to talk about and encourage better ways of being in the world, and at least in my view, better ways. Because I don't think goth should be stripped of all its relationship to its musical history, but also to its transformative power and its relationship with feminism and queerness and anti-racism and even like working class solidarity and DIY creativity and political discourse and so on, and its relationship with existential questions of love and loss and what does it mean to be. And for me, the culture part of goth culture constitutes an entanglement with culture, with bodies, and with the environment. And these things are dependent upon each other. So I think goth necessarily has more to say about the world and people in it than just the valuing of a collection of things above all else. And in some cases, I think to the detriment, actually, of the world around us. I think that goth may be seen now as less shocking and transgressive than in the past, right? Which it can be a good and bad thing. The goths aren't seen as potential mass shooters or as satanic affronts to Christianity or unemployable deviants to be kept out of the public space. And I think you can't deny that the normalization of goth in part has to do with a capitalist commodification that presents goth in specific ways that are palatable for a marketplace of ideas, a marketplace of commodities. And this removes any potential transformative power from the goth community and allows these systems set up by rich white men to essentially dictate what the ethos of goth is. And I don't stand for that, and I think it's something that we should talk about, as we do on this show. Okay, enough of that. I do want to mention, though, before we wrap up, that, I usually always mention what's coming next for the podcast, what the next episode is. And to do that this time, I have to talk a little bit about the production side of the podcast. So this month, I will be taking a break from publishing the second episode of the month, which the last 3 or 4 months has been the Music Mausoleum, an episode about music, reviews, that kind of thing. As it stands, I'm pushing myself too hard at the expense of rest, connection with others, and my health. This is an entertainment show. Yeah, it's supposed to be fun and lighthearted generally, but I try and put a ton of work and love and care into this podcast because this is my passion project. This is my magnum opus, I guess. And I'm constantly burning the candle at both ends. I think this comes as a detriment to myself, but also potentially to the podcast, because to be candid, to be honest, there's aspects of the show that I wish I could flesh out more. I haven't been able to keep up on research that I used to do, like reading all the articles and online discussions in forums and on social media. In the early years, I would actually spend hours and hours reading content online, trying to stay up to date on what the sort of zeitgeist is, what the arguments for various aspects of the subculture are. I also don't have time to sit down and reflect on past episodes and sort of think about what would I change, what would I fix, what would I do differently, what did I like, what did I not like. I essentially am constantly just creating go, go, go. Here's the next thing, here's the next thing, here's the next thing. And I think that leads to a less satisfying creation process and potentially not as great of a show as I would like to produce. I also haven't been able to say yes to other opportunities that I would have in the past, like interviews on other shows, or how I've contributed to like magazines and that kind of thing in the past. The interview we did with the Den Bosch Museum, I don't have the ability to do that kind of thing anymore. And I haven't had the time to promote the show or really be active on social media. And that nonstop connection with the community online is what gained the audience for this podcast in the first 5 years, that sort of tireless communication and outreach. And it really does break my heart that I don't have the time and energy to build and maintain relationships with friends and colleagues and other people in the broader community, people in the subcultural media space, even people on Patreon. And honestly, that digs at me almost every day is something I think about and lament. I will, on the positive side, I will say I do think the podcast has improved over the years and the quality is better than ever, but it is a passion project. And what I've realized is the other aspects of my life, I have 2 other jobs in addition to this. I have a family, I have friends and chronic health issues and financial responsibilities. What I end up doing is prioritizing the podcast over those things and over my self-care when I have some free time. And I feel like I'm killing myself trying to keep it going. And as I say this, it feels a bit silly to reflect on all of that, just to simply say, hey, there's not a second episode this month. And to say that, hey, I'm not completely sure what our episode next month will be because I've had a hard time getting the guests that I want to agree to come on, and I have had cancellations. But to me, from my perspective, it does feel like a failure. And I think I just deeply regret not having the time that I want to pour into this show. And I know many of you have listened since the very beginning, and many of you who recently found the show are very passionate about it and your support for it. And I want to honor that by creating the best show for the community that I can. Over the 9 years that the show has been going, we've had listeners start families, start their own goth communities and networks. We've even had deaths in the community as well. Most recently, I talked about Sanctus Monium, my friend Misty, who died this year, and who was a friend of the show and was on the show. So this podcast to me feels intimately entangled with you and with the goth community and with my life. I know it's been with many of you through extremely difficult circumstances and acted as a source of comfort and normalcy. And for those reasons, I think I will have to die or end up homeless before this show goes off the air. For those reasons, I wanted to just express my lament over not being able to reach the heights of what I think this show could be. And also recognize that I need to step back for the sake of my health and the podcast when it's necessary. So with all of that said, I just want to share my sincerest appreciation of everyone who has enjoyed and supported the show, and to everyone on Patreon who keeps me afloat and keeps this show afloat. I know it's hard right now. Everybody is barely surviving and meeting their material needs. And so the support that is shown for us through Patreon is extremely appreciated and not thought of lightly. So I hope to be back next month. Like I said, I cannot guarantee what the episode will be, though I'm trying very hard to put it together. Thank you for being with us, and until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.